It felt like being slapped in the face with ice, sharp, sudden, and humiliating. The email lit up my screen like a cruel spotlight, illuminating everything I wasn't. Final RSVP list. Caldwell, 70th birthday dinner. I clicked it open with the dumb hope of someone still pretending this was all some sort of clerical error. But as I scanned the names, each one perfectly spelled, each one arranged with ceremonial precision, I felt the heat rise in my throat. 20 names. Cousins who never called. Family friends who barely remembered birthdays. A former nanny, but not me. I'm about to share something personal. But first, drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how many hearts this story can touch. Not Anna Caldwell. Wife of the host's firstborn son. Daughter-in-law of the great patriarch. Event planner to the Boston elite. I wasn't just forgotten. I was erased. The kitchen around me dimmed as the morning sun dipped behind a cloud, as if the universe itself recoiled from what it had just revealed. And then came the footsteps, measured, casual, oblivious. Sean strolled in, still damp from his workout, scrolling through his phone as if my world hadn't just collapsed in an inbox ambush. "Good run?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the effort it took to sound human. "Yeah, cleared my head." He kissed my cheek, lips cool, unconcerned. "Oh, and the final dinner list came through. Looks like Dad's set." "Set?" I repeated. He didn't even notice the way I gripped the counter, didn't see how my entire body had gone cold. "You forgot to tell me I wasn't invited." His brow furrowed slightly. "You said you might be too busy. With your new client?" I stared at him, stunned by how casually he rewrote the truth. "I never said that." He shrugged, eyes still on his phone. "It's just... Dad wanted something intimate. You know, family." There it was. That word again. Family. Always wielded like a weapon when it suited them. When it excluded me. I turned away before he could see the fury behind my eyes, locked myself in the bathroom, breathed, and then opened my laptop with hands that no longer trembled. They wanted to uninvite me from the story. Fine, I'd rewrite the ending. It didn't start with an empty chair or a missing invitation. It started with glances that lingered a beat too long, introductions that came without my name, compliments that felt like veiled corrections. The first time I met Henry Caldwell, he shook my hand like he was assessing the quality of leather. Firm, impersonal, vaguely condescending. "You're the event girl, right?" he said, already looking past me. I was standing in my own apartment, hosting a dinner I had cooked, at a table I had refinished by hand. Event girl. Later I would hear him refer to me as Sean's little project. During a golf call I wasn't supposed to overhear, I smiled through it, like I always did, like I was taught to do. It was the way he never asked about my business. Elite gatherings, a firm I built from scratch. Not once did he ask how many clients I had or how I landed the mayor's daughter's wedding, or what it took to juggle 16 events in 3 countries. He'd ask if I was still doing those little parties, as if I were a teenager selling lemonade. At dinners, he'd interrupt me mid-sentence to redirect the conversation towards stocks, politics, or one of his long-winded toasts about American grit, conveniently forgetting that I, too, had worked for everything I had. When I talked, he'd tilt his head slightly, the way you do when you're not really listening but want to seem polite. That tilt became my barometer, measured indifference masquerading as civility. And yet, he'd always include me just enough to make it look like I was part of the fold. A framed photo at the edge of the bookshelf, a Christmas card signed "Love All of Us," a seat at the table, until there wasn't one. The worst part wasn't the words. It was the performance, the calculated civility, the way Eleanor would ask about my parents with a sweet smile that barely masked her relief when I mentioned they lived in Ohio, far, far away from Boston society. How Henry would laugh a little too loudly at his own jokes, always glancing at Sean to be sure he laughed too. And Sean, God, Sean, he would sit there smiling, sipping his wine, playing both sides like a man afraid to lose either. Every family has cracks. But the Caldwells had architecture designed around them. Ornate facades, pristine table settings, and a rigid hierarchy disguised as tradition. My mistake was thinking I could slip in unnoticed. Their mistake was thinking I wouldn't notice at all. Now I saw every crack, and I was done patching them up. People always said we looked perfect together, Sean in his tailored suits, hair always effortlessly styled, with that polished ease of someone born into money and never taught how to worry. Me in the carefully curated dresses, smile precise, always ready to charm. Together we made sense, on paper, in photos, at fundraisers. He was legacy. I was ambition. He had the name. I brought the narrative. We were a brand. In the beginning, I told myself that was enough. That mutual admiration and shared calendars counted for something. That love didn't have to be wild as long as it was consistent. And for a while it was. Flowers delivered to my office, tickets to the symphony, dinners at places with linen menus and unspoken dress codes. It was easy to believe in the image, easier still to keep performing it, but intimacy was always surface level. His questions were perfunctory. How was your day? Followed immediately by checking his phone. He never asked why I worked late, what my projects meant to me, or how I was really holding up under the pressure of planning 5 high-profile events in 2 cities. When I spoke about my work, his eyes glazed, and he nodded politely, waiting for his turn. He never raised his voice. He never hit me. He never cheated, at least not then. But the absence of harm is not the presence of love. What he gave me was politeness, status, access. What I gave him was polish, presentation. A woman his father could nod at during dinner without frowning, someone who looked right in photos, who could field small talk with CEOs and senators' wives. I made him look like the man he was raised to be. But at home it was cold, beautiful, but cold. His affection was scheduled, his apologies were curated. Our conversations felt like press releases, brief, polished, and full of things unsaid. And the silences between us? They stretched like hallways in a mansion, long, echoing, empty. There were no blow-ups, no scenes, just the slow erosion of connection. I stopped telling him when I got good news. He stopped noticing when I left a room. We played our parts so well that even I started to forget we were just pretending. Until the pretending wasn't enough. Until that email reminded me that I wasn't even part of the illusion anymore. That's the thing about marriages built on appearances. They photograph well. They sound right. They hold up at cocktail parties. But behind closed doors, they collapse under the weight of everything left unsaid. And mine had been collapsing for years. Henry Caldwell never raised his voice. He didn't have to. His authority filled rooms before he entered them, his presence casting a shadow so long the rest of us just adapted to living beneath it. It was in the way conversations tilted toward his opinion, no matter how the subject started. How dinners were timed to his appetite, how vacations revolved around his golf schedule, how even silence at the table somehow belonged to him. He had a knack for making every decision seem like a family consensus after he had already decided. At first, I mistook it for old-school charm, a man of tradition, values, discipline. But tradition, I learned, was just another word for control, dressed in expensive suits and hand-stitched Italian shoes. He didn't micromanage with spreadsheets or emails. He did it with expectations, the kind so deeply ingrained that to question them felt like heresy. Rules weren't written down, but they were enforced. Everyone arrived at the Cape House by Thursday evening, even if the party wasn't until Saturday. No one wore jeans to dinner, not even the children. Phones off during speeches, champagne always poured before Henry spoke. If you dared deviate, you were corrected with a smile so polite it chilled you. Once I brought a bottle of wine to a family dinner, something special from a small vineyard in Oregon I'd worked with. He took it from my hands, turned the label with a wrinkle of distaste, and handed it off to the caterer with the kind of nod you give when something needs to be dealt with. Moments later, a 1998 Bordeaux appeared on the table without comment. Mine never made it to the corkscrew. Over time, I noticed how even his children orbited him, like moons tethered to an unspoken gravity. Melissa never booked her kids' school trips without checking his calendar. Thomas ran every business decision by him, despite having an MBA from Wharton. And Sean, my husband, the one who used to say he wanted to break free, always deferred to what Dad would want. What Dad would want? That sentence haunted every conversation, every holiday, every choice. And if Henry didn't want something, it vanished. One summer, I suggested we take a family photo that included the in-laws, a single image, just once. Eleanor smiled tightly, said she'd see what Henry thinks. It never happened. The next year, the same request. This time, no smile. Henry believes the family portraits should reflect the core lineage, she said. Core lineage, as if I were an accessory to be photoshopped out. But the thing about control is that it depends on people believing they have none. Henry never noticed I had stopped seeking his approval. He never saw the moment I stopped playing by his rules, because by then, I was already rewriting mine. They never said it outright. No one ever looked me in the eye and declared I didn't belong. But it was in everything. In the pauses, in the glances, in the effortless way they could include me just enough to make my exclusion seem like my own misunderstanding. At every family event, I arrived polished, prepared, presentable. I brought gifts, never too flashy, always thoughtful. I complimented the table settings, remembered birthdays, asked about their tennis injuries and charity galas. I laughed at the inside jokes, even when I didn't understand them. I watched old family vacation videos with a smile, even though I wasn't in a single frame. But no matter how many place cards I calligraphed or weekends I sacrificed, I was never truly one of them. When they spoke of real Caldwells, I wasn't included, not even by marriage. It was in the way Eleanor would say our kind of people with a knowing glance, as if I should know exactly what that meant, and exactly that I wasn't it. Or how Henry would recount stories of family traditions stretching back 3 generations. His eyes skimming past me like I was a temporary fixture in their antique collection. The worst offenders were the subtle ones. Melissa with her gleaming smile and rehearsed warmth, who would lean in and say things like, "You've done so well for yourself," in the same tone she used to compliment the help. Or Thomas's wife Claire, who once asked at brunch if I'd ever considered slowing down now that I had secured my place. As if my ambition were a phase. As if I'd been chasing something I'd finally caught. Them. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was too sensitive, that they were just formal. Old money formal, reserved. But then came the family tree project. One of the grandchildren needed it for school. The aunts gathered, fussing over names and dates and old photo albums. I offered to help. Claire smiled like I was a child playing grown-up and said, "Oh, we've got this, dear. It's bloodline stuff." Bloodline stuff. I excused myself and went to the guest room where I stared at my reflection in the mirror, wondering how much longer I could keep pretending this was my family, wondering when I had started to believe that proximity was the same as belonging. Wondering if I had ever really stopped being the girl from a middle-class Ohio neighborhood who didn't know the right wine to order or the right schools to reference in idle conversation. I had built a life, a business, a name. But here in their world, none of it mattered, because I wasn't born into it. Because I wasn't one of them. And I never would be. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, rain against the windows, a fire flickering in the marble hearth. Sean upstairs on a call with his father. I curled up in the study, his study technically, while dinner cooled in the oven. He'd left his tablet on the desk, screen still glowing. I glanced at it, at first without intention, but then I saw it. My name. Subject line, discussion, trust reallocation. Anna Caldwell's status. My breath caught, something primal flaring in my chest. I hesitated only a second before I tapped the message open, fingers suddenly trembling. I told myself it was probably about taxes, paperwork, something benign. It wasn't. The email was from the Caldwell family's estate attorney, addressed to Sean, and CC'd to Henry. Phrases jumped off the screen like landmines. Temporary removal until divorce is finalised. Minimizing exposure through adjusted allocations. Public narrative to be managed by PR consultant. It wasn't a conversation, it was a plan. And I wasn't part of it. I scrolled through the thread, each message colder than the last. Sean had replied 2 days ago. Understood. Please proceed per my father's outline. Let's ensure this doesn't delay the dinner announcement. The dinner. The dinner. A sharp, bitter laugh caught in my throat, swallowed by the silence of the room. I felt like I was falling, not fast, but in slow motion, the kind of descent where you register every betrayal with excruciating clarity. They weren't just cutting me out. They were orchestrating it with precision. Quietly. Legally. Permanently. I took screenshots. I emailed them to myself. Then I closed the tablet and placed it exactly where I found it. Upstairs, I could still hear his voice, low and practiced, reassuring, like he wasn't casually planning the end of our marriage with the same detachment he used to order wine at dinner. The room felt unfamiliar now, like I'd stepped into someone else's life mid-sentence. My eyes moved over the shelves, his degrees, his awards, the old Caldwell family Bible encased in glass, symbols of legacy, of inheritance, of control. My photo was still on the desk, framed in silver, our wedding day captured in golden light. I stared at it, wondering if he'd leave it there when he replaced me. The air was heavy with decisions I hadn't yet made. I stood up slowly, every movement deliberate. I would not break. I would not rage. I would not ask why. Because now I knew the answer. They had never seen me as one of them. And now they were making it official. But what they didn't realise, what Sean didn't see through all that polished betrayal, was that I had seen enough. Enough to know exactly how to dismantle everything they thought they'd built. Confrontation would be satisfying, yes, but brief. One explosion, a few choice words, and I'd be written off as emotional, unstable, dramatic. That was their language, their script. Henry would shake his head with grave disappointment, Eleanor would sigh like a woman burdened with too much grace, and Sean would play the weary husband who tried everything. No, if they wanted quiet removal, I'd give them silence, but on my terms. The next morning I poured their coffee with a smile, kissed Sean's cheek, complimented Eleanor's dress. I played the part so well it frightened me, but behind the rehearsed pleasantries, I was taking inventory. Of tone, of expressions, of every clipped sentence that hinted at things I wasn't supposed to hear. They were careful, smugly so, but no one expects the woman smiling at the breakfast table to be building an archive. I began with the shared family calendar, checking for odd entries, strange blocks of time labelled board briefing or family prep. I synced it to my own devices and cross-referenced every change. Then the emails. I'd already found the trust documents on Sean's tablet, but I knew there was more. Back channels, attachments, financials they never expected me to understand. They had no idea who I was, what I could do. I made a habit of excusing myself mid-conversation, just checking on the caterer. Oh, the florist had a question. Each time I'd slip into the guest bedroom, open my laptop, and screenshot everything I could find. Offshore account routing numbers, legal drafts from the family lawyer, handwritten notes scanned into PDFs and casually dropped in a folder titled Contingency Docs. One day I found a message from Henry to the estate planner. Move forward regardless of her reaction. We have her signature on the initial merger clause. She's not entitled to challenge what was never hers. Never hers. That night, I stood on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the moonlight skim across the Napa Hills. The house behind me glowed with curated beauty, candles flickering on monogrammed tablecloths, the quiet clink of cutlery behind double-paned glass. From a distance it looked like a dream. Up close, it was a stage set for betrayal. Sean joined me for a moment, wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "You've been quiet," he murmured. I leaned into him just enough. Just tired, big week ahead. He kissed the top of my head like he always did. Practiced, hollow. I clinked my glass against his. To family, I said. He smiled. He had no idea that I had already begun dismantling his. It started with a missed call from my biggest client, Emma Prescott, heiress, art dealer, impossible to impress. We were finalizing her spring gala, a multi-million-dollar affair set to take over 2 wings of the Museum of Fine Arts. I had poured 6 months of my life into it. The floral blueprint alone had taken 3 meetings and 4 design drafts. Her voicemail was brief, cold. Anna, we need to talk. Something's come up. Something had indeed come up. But I wouldn't understand what until 2 days later when I walked into the museum offices and was greeted not with a handshake but a polite nod from her assistant and an envelope waiting on the conference table. Prescott Events had been awarded the contract. Prescott, my competitor. Sloppy, flashy. Known for overcharging and under-delivering, but also known for one crucial detail. Her father sat on the same investment board as Henry Caldwell. I called Emma directly. She didn't pick up. I texted once, then again. Finally, she responded. I was advised it was best to go with a firm that offered long-term financial stability. No hard feelings. Long-term financial stability. The words sat heavy in my chest. My company had never missed a payment, never defaulted on a contract. But I knew what this was. I knew it in my bones. Someone had whispered the right lie to the right person at the right moment. Later that night, I found the email. It was buried in the family's shared financial folder, something I was never meant to see. A forwarded message from a board assistant, addressed to Henry. Per your request, I've shared the concerns about Anna's firm's liquidity with our clients in the circle. Most understand your preference. Concerns, preferences. And just like that, a 6-figure contract slipped through my fingers. My team would be fine, barely, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the message. They weren't just removing me from the family. They were erasing my foundation brick by brick. I told no one, not my staff, not even my accountant. I showed up the next day to our office with croissants and fake cheer, complimented the junior planner's vision board, reviewed budgets and confirmed vendor payments. But something in me had shifted. They thought they could dim my light by cutting off the oxygen. They underestimated the woman who built her empire with no last name to lean on, no family board to bail her out. If they wanted war disguised as courtesy, I would meet them in kind. But I would win by not flinching, and I would win in silence. The vineyard was golden with late afternoon light, the kind that made everything look softer than it really was. We stood on a terrace overlooking the hills, glasses in hand, pretending to be one big happy dynasty. Henry was in his element, swirling a glass of Barolo while lecturing the sommelier about tannins, his voice filling the silence like a sermon. Eleanor nodded dutifully, lips tight in something that passed for approval. I stood slightly apart, as I always did, near the stone railing with a glass I hadn't touched. The wine was excellent, of course it was, but I didn't trust myself to drink. Not tonight. The younger cousins had clustered near the far end of the table, already tipsy on inheritance and aged Bordeaux. I heard them before I saw them. Whispered laughter, muffled snorts, the kind of banter that always seemed to carry a little too far when I entered the room. I stepped closer, pretending to admire the vines. That's when I heard it. Wonder how long this one's got left, one of them chuckled, swirling his wine like a villain in a bad film. Think we'll meet the next Caldwell wife by Christmas? A smattering of laughter followed, quick, stifled, sharp. One voice piped in. Vanessa's already halfway moved in, hasn't she? Technically, said another, voice slick with wine and arrogance. She never really moved out. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Just stared down into the glass, watching the deep red swirl like blood. They hadn't seen me. Or worse, they had. The conversation shifted when one of the aunts approached, asking about harvest dates, and the cousins scattered like schoolboys, their smugness trailing behind them like cheap cologne. I remained at the edge, heart pounding, face blank. I should have expected it. I'd seen the signs, the missed calls, the late-night texts, the sudden changes in his tone. I had even seen her name in his phone once. Vanessa dismissed with a lazy, "She's just going through something." But hearing it aloud as a joke, as a given, confirmed what I already knew. The plans were well underway, not just legal, not just financial, but personal, public. The next Caldwell wife. As if I were already gone. As if I'd only ever been a placeholder. I took a sip of the wine, finally, and let it burn. I could have confronted them. I could have shattered the glass and demanded answers. But instead I smiled, because what they didn't know, what none of them had figured out, was that the placeholder had learned how to pull every string. And soon, they would all know what it felt like to be replaced. It happened in the most ordinary way. In the hallway between the guest bedrooms, where the scent of peonies from Eleanor's arrangement still hung in the air, I had stepped out to breathe, just a moment away from the rehearsal of civility downstairs, and there she was, Melissa, Sean's sister, the golden child with the always perfect blowout, and a voice that smiled even when her words didn't. We hadn't spoken more than pleasantries in months. Her loyalty had always been clear, to the name, to the legacy, to the idea of what a Caldwell should be. She was Eleanor in training, just with better skincare. She looked around first, made sure the hallway was empty, and stepped closer. "I shouldn't be saying anything," she whispered. That got my attention. I leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "Then don't." Her lips tightened. "You deserve to know. They're planning to make it look like you left voluntarily, but it was all your decision. Dad's been coordinating with PR. There's going to be a statement, pictures, an entire narrative." I didn't speak. I just looked at her, and something shifted in her face, something almost like regret. "They're calling it a mutual separation. That you've decided to step away from the family quietly to focus on your business. It'll come out right after the dinner." Of course. Always after the dinner. After the show. I wondered if she realized how deep the orchestration went. Or if this was her way of washing her hands before the knives came out. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes dropped and she ran a manicured finger along the edge of the hallway table. "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible in this family. And because if they can do it to you, they can do it to anyone, even me." I almost laughed. The idea that Melissa, the favoured daughter, the careful mimic of Eleanor's elegance, was scared of being pushed out was both ridiculous and painfully true. She looked up again. "You didn't hear this from me, but whatever you're planning, make sure it's finished before they speak first. That's how they win." And then she was gone. Down the stairs in a swish of silk and practiced grace, back to her seat beside Eleanor, where she would nod and sip and smile like nothing had happened. But something had. The house still smelled like peonies. The walls were still white and smooth and expensive. But now one of them had cracked the surface. And that was all I needed. It was almost too easy. The passwords hadn't changed. Sean's laptop was still synced to the cloud, and the folder labelled Q4 Finance Review was right there on the desktop, like it was begging to be opened. As if no one expected me to look. As if they believed I was too distracted by flowers and seating charts to dig through numbers and names. They'd forgotten I built my business on precision, on spotting inconsistencies, on knowing exactly where the cracks would appear. The first document was a spreadsheet, innocent enough, until I noticed the column marked Transfers. BVI Holdings. A familiar acronym. I clicked through. Hidden under layers of nested tabs and summary sheets were transfer logs to 3 offshore accounts, all funneled through shell companies. Each one cleaned just enough to pass as legitimate, unless you knew what you were looking for. And I did. The amounts weren't small, hundreds of thousands siphoned monthly, disguised as consulting fees and asset management. Henry's name appeared only once, on a scanned signature authorizing strategic relocation of legacy holdings. But Sean's name was everywhere. He wasn't just aware, he was involved. My stomach twisted, but I didn't stop. The next file was a PDF of legal drafts. Proposed exit strategy. AM. My initials. I opened it with shaking hands, and it was a blueprint. A clean, sanitized version of the end of my marriage. Bullet points outlining a timeline for the announcement. Financial terms carefully worded to seem fair, but stripped of everything I was entitled to. They had framed it as mutual. Of course they had. The clause that broke me was buried on page 4. Subject agrees to forego all claim to Caldwell assets in exchange for reputational discretion. Discretion. In their world, silence had a price tag. The final file was a memo from the family lawyer, addressed to Henry and Sean, detailing how to manage press interest, how to ensure my company didn't leverage the divorce for sympathy, and how to quietly realign Caldwell investments with more image-consistent partners. I sat back, the glow of the laptop screen sharp against the night. They were preparing to erase me, financially, publicly, permanently. And they were doing it with the same cold efficiency they applied to boardroom decisions. I was a liability now, something to be handled, but I wasn't broken. I copied every document, emailed them to a secure drive, backed them up twice. When I closed the laptop, my hands were steady. They thought I was busy arranging candlelight and hors d'oeuvres. They didn't realize I had just built my own firewall, and the storm was coming. I smiled through every toast, laughed at every rehearsed anecdote. I let Eleanor air-kiss my cheek and let Henry pat my shoulder like I was a loyal pet who had learned her place. I poured wine. I passed appetizers. I nodded at stories I'd heard 100 times before, stories that always ended with someone from the right family marrying someone even righter. And I was flawless, unshakable. No one knew that beneath the silk blouse and borrowed diamond earrings, my phone buzzed quietly in my clutch, capturing timestamps, location data, and screen recordings. I had set the voice memo app to run during every gathering, letting it soak in the casual cruelties, the unguarded remarks, the not-so-subtle plans they assumed I was too polished or too stupid to catch. I hosted the pre-dinner cocktail hour with the ease of someone who had done it 100 times before, because I had. Every event was executed with my eye for detail, my ability to make it look effortless. No one suspected that while I adjusted flower arrangements and offered guests their preferred gin, I was silently logging every transaction, cross-referencing invoices, and confirming that the company credit card attached to each reservation bore my name, not theirs. Melissa caught my eye during one of these performances, just for a second. There was something like pity there, or guilt, but she said nothing, just raised her glass and smiled like the rest of them. Sean was charming, he always was. He rested a hand on my back when we entered a room, not out of love, but protocol. I felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just a quiet, coiled control. I had passed heartbreak weeks ago. What remained was cold, sharp clarity. At one point, Henry raised a toast in the garden, glass glinting in the sun. To family, he said, his voice rich and theatrical. To loyalty, legacy, and those who know how to uphold it. They all turned to look at me then. Not directly, not overtly, but with just enough weight to let me know the line had been rehearsed. I lifted my glass, held their gaze, smiled. I knew what they were doing. They thought I would break quietly, that I'd bow out with grace, too proud to cause a scene, that I'd sign the papers, fade from the photos, and become a whisper between courses at future dinners. They didn't realize I had stopped playing their game weeks ago. And they never saw the knife in my smile. They had no idea what I was capable of. While they toasted themselves over 5-course meals and monogrammed menus, I was building my arsenal with the calm of a woman who had planned more galas, fundraisers, and destination weddings than they could pronounce without a sommelier present. Event planning isn't just florals and linen choices. It's architecture. It's orchestration. It's power. And I knew exactly which strings to cut. It began with the hotel. The entire Caldwell entourage was booked into 5 suites under my company's contract. My credit line. My guarantees. One quiet email to the director of guest relations, someone I'd worked with on a Fortune 500 merger dinner, and the terms were reviewed, adjusted, marked as pending. Then the vineyard tour, Henry's pride. I contacted the events coordinator directly, a woman named Katerina, whose wedding I'd planned 2 summers ago when her in-laws tried to hijack the guest list. She remembered me, called me Signora Anna, told me she'd cancel with grace and hold my deposit until I confirmed otherwise. The yacht, scheduled for a private cruise along the Italian coast, gone. The chef's tasting menu at the villa in Tuscany, scrapped, with a promise to prioritize future business from me instead. They didn't realize the power I held was never in the Caldwell name. It was in reputation, in trust. These vendors didn't work for Henry or Eleanor, or even Sean. They worked for me. And they knew, long before the Caldwells ever showed up, who held the real pen when the contracts were signed. Every time they laughed behind my back, I was pulling one more thread from the fabric of their perfect illusion. Every wine toast, every seating chart review, every fake compliment, I was matching it with another cancellation, another reversed payment, another lock placed quietly on the doors they assumed would open. I knew their schedule better than they did. I had built it, layered it with contingencies, backups, and vendor protocols they never even thought to question. And now I was dismantling it with the same precision. Piece by piece. No mess, no noise. Only silence, the kind that happens right before a chandelier crashes. By the time they realized something was wrong, it would be too late. The dinner, the vineyard, the weekend, their reputations. I wasn't just planning their downfall, and I was curating it. They thought they had backup plans. Of course they did. Caldwell's never trusted one path, one supplier, one itinerary. There were always options, alternate caterers, extra drivers, secondary venues held in soft reservations, safety nets sewn by people like me. But what they didn't realize was that I had built those nets. I knew where every thread led, and I knew exactly how to unravel them. By the time Sean confirmed the final guest count, without my name, of course, I was already logged into the back end of our reservation management system. My initials were on every contract. My business credit line had secured every down payment. Even their Plan Bs and Plan Cs were tethered to me. Their control was an illusion, an expensive one. I began with the helicopter transport scheduled for Sunday morning, a scenic flight to the coast for brunch, a quick email to Lorenzo, a personal contact I'd worked with on a royal engagement party last spring. Client cancellation, please release the time slot. He replied within 10 minutes. Understood. Shall I hold the refund or transfer to your preferred account? Next, the second villa, quietly booked as a private alternative in case the primary property failed to meet Henry's expectations. I had recommended the villa to them months ago. It sat tucked into a grove of olive trees, ancient and untouched by time. I loved that place. That's why it hurt momentarily to let it go. But I typed the cancellation with steady fingers. No explanation, just finality. Each vendor was familiar. Each name tied to a favor owed, a kindness returned. I wasn't some scorned woman unraveling threads in desperation. I was a strategist rerouting the current. Calm, surgical, professional. The catering contingency team? Cancelled. The transport liaison for emergency arrivals? Gone. The backup photographer? Flown in discreetly from Milan because Eleanor wasn't sure the local one could capture her angles properly? Released. By nightfall, I had dismantled every escape hatch they thought they'd reserved. What remained was a hollowed-out plan masquerading as luxury. No one noticed a thing. At dinner, Sean praised the wine selection. Henry made a joke about being surrounded by excellence, never realizing that excellence was quietly withdrawing its services, its availability, its loyalty. Eleanor complimented the floral centerpieces that would never be delivered again. I smiled. There's a unique power in knowing how a structure is built, an even greater one in watching it collapse, knowing you're the only one holding the blueprint. It was late. The house was quiet in that particular way only wealth allows. Thick walls, hushed rugs, the soft hum of air conditioning disguising the coldness underneath. Sean had gone to bed early after yet another empty conversation about dinner logistics. He kissed my cheek with the mechanical affection of a man playing a role he no longer wanted. I stayed downstairs, in the study. The fire was low, my laptop open. I wasn't even searching anymore. I told myself that. But the truth was, by then, I had learned to follow my instincts, and my instincts were screaming. It started with a flight confirmation, an email buried in a subfolder marked Logistics, Europe. The subject line was innocuous. Confirmed private jet, Florence to Santorini. I hovered my mouse over it, unsure why I suddenly felt so cold. Then I clicked. 2 passengers, 1 cabin, Santorini, honeymoon suite at a 5-star cliffside resort, all booked under his name and hers, Vanessa Hughes, the woman he had once called a college mistake, though his family had never quite let go of her. The one who still showed up in holiday small talk and fundraising events like a ghost only I could see. He hadn't even bothered to use an alias. There was a note attached to the reservation. Romantic renewal after a stressful few months. Please ensure discretion for Mr. Caldwell and guest. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from rage so clean and sharp it felt like glass slicing through water. Renewal. That word echoed through me, like our marriage was just a project he'd let expire. And this was the relaunch, a softer, more compliant version, the one they all wanted. I sat back and stared at the screen, my hands folded calmly in my lap. There it was, the last straw. Not the affair, not even the audacity of the bookings, but the fact that he had made plans for love, for romance, for a future with someone else, while still looking me in the eyes every day and saying nothing. I closed the email, downloaded every attachment, forwarded them to the secure drive I'd been quietly filling. Then I deleted nothing. I wanted him to wonder if I had seen it. I wanted him to feel the possibility like a blade at his back. Upstairs, I could hear his steady breathing, peaceful, dreaming perhaps, of blue water and white linens, and a woman who had never once had to fight for her place at the table. Let him dream, because by the time he woke, the war he'd never seen coming would already be halfway won. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, spilling warm light onto polished marble. Aroma, Rome's most exclusive rooftop restaurant, glowed beneath a canopy of stars. The scent of lemon blossoms mingled with aged wine and something else, something colder. Anticipation, calculation. The Caldwell family had already arrived. I spotted them gathered near the table, a sweeping round masterpiece framed by flickering candles and a perfect view of the Colosseum. 13 settings, or at least there should have been. I walked slowly, deliberately. My Valentino gown whispered against the floor, each step a reminder. I had not come to beg. Eleanor was radiant in crimson, her diamonds catching the light like the flash of a blade. Sean stood beside her, glass in hand, the picture of practiced ease. He glanced up, and for the briefest second his smile faltered. I moved toward the table, scanning for my name, my place. It wasn't there. No card, no chair. Just a void between Henry and Melissa where I should have been. The space had been closed with seamless elegance, napkins folded, cutlery symmetrical, a design so flawless you might think I'd never existed at all. For a moment, no one said a word. No one had to. Their silence was its own symphony. Then Eleanor spoke, voice light and layered in sugar. "Oh, Anna, there must have been a mix-up with the seating. How strange, so." "Strange?" I looked directly at her, not smiling. "Yes, strange." Melissa glanced at Sean, who shifted slightly, the way men do when they realise their performance has been caught mid-act. And then he said it. with that same smooth, dismissive chuckle I had once mistaken for charm. "Oops," he said. "Guess we miscounted." Laughter rippled across the table, not loud, just soft enough to cut deep. I could have yelled. I could have demanded they find me a chair, a card, a place. I could have made a scene worthy of gossip columns and whispered phone calls. Instead, I stood straighter. My hands rested calmly on either side of the empty space where I was meant to be. I met each of their eyes, one by one, and then, clear and unshaken, I said, "Seems I'm not family." No one laughed, no one moved, and then I turned and walked away. Not quickly, not angrily, with dignity, with clarity, with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who knew exactly what came next. For a moment I thought no one had heard me. My words, "Seems I'm not family," hung in the air like perfume after someone has already left the room. Fragile, lingering, impossible to ignore. No one moved, no one spoke. I looked around the table, at faces frozen mid-toast, mid-fork, mid-smile. Melissa's lips were slightly parted, a hint of laughter still there, now curdling into something sour. Henry's expression had gone flat, unreadable. A man too accustomed to control to comprehend the sound of someone walking away from it. Eleanor held her champagne flute just inches from her lips, her hand stiff, perfectly manicured fingers clutching crystal like a weapon. Her face had not changed. She still wore that smug half-smile she always wore when things went according to plan. Except this wasn't her ending. Sean stared at me, not in guilt, not in love, in calculation, as if he was already weighing the fallout, already strategizing damage control. But there was something else, too. The faintest flicker of surprise. I had stepped off the script. That unsettled him. "Anna," he said quietly, like my name might still tether me to the performance. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The silence at the table had deepened. Even the waitstaff hesitated at the edges, trays in hand, unsure if this was theatre or a real fracture, if they should keep serving. I stepped back from the table, slowly, letting the rustle of silk and the scrape of my heels punctuate the tension. It wasn't rage in my steps. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity, pure and sharpened by months of restraint. The line had landed exactly where it was meant to. Eleanor finally set her glass down, the soft clink unnaturally loud. "Darling," she said, voice honeyed, "don't be dramatic." I turned my head slightly, just enough to look her in the eye. "I'm not. I'm just done." That was the true fracture, not the missing seat, not the rehearsed joke or the fake surprise. It was my refusal to perform anymore. And then I walked. Past the candlelight, past the maitre d' who gave a slight nod of understanding. Past the guests, at nearby tables, watching with muted curiosity, sensing something unspoken unravelling in front of them. The doors opened into the Roman night, warm and still. I took a breath, the kind that fills your lungs not with air, but with freedom. Inside they would recover, reorganize, explain. They would write the narrative in real time, as they always did. But the room would never be the same, because I had broken it, with one sentence, spoken not in anger, but in truth. The lounge was quiet, dim lighting, velvet chairs, a single candle flickering beside my untouched espresso. From where I sat, I could still see the restaurant's terrace through the window, just enough of it to watch shadows move across linen and candlelight. The Caldwells were still at the table, no doubt spinning my absence into a digestible story. Something polite, something controlled. They had 30 minutes, maybe less. I opened my laptop and connected to the secure network. Every reservation, every contract, every deposit, they were all housed in one folder, labelled simply, Roma, Caldwell. I had colour-coded tabs, timestamps, digital authorizations, and now I would reverse every one. The restaurant was first. I drafted the message to Marco, the maitre d', with language we'd agreed upon long ago. Per clause 9A in our agreement, Please proceed with the contingency protocol effective immediately. Authorization attached. Thank you for your discretion. I attached proof of the reversal payment and clicked send. Next was the vineyard. The tasting, the private lunch, the guided cellar tour that Henry had insisted include a rare bottle uncorked for his name alone. Gone. I called Katerina directly. Her voice was calm, warm. Capito, I understand. We will release the reservation and return the balance. Then the yacht. The Amalfi excursion. The charter company had worked with me before on far grander events than this. I sent the cancellation code, and in less than 2 minutes, the entire day-long trip dissolved into a polite, unforeseen change in schedule. The Vatican tour, the villa in Tuscany, the private chef, the drivers, the post-dinner fireworks. Yes, actual fireworks. All cancelled, retracted, closed. By the time I finished my espresso, the entire Caldwell birthday week had been gutted from the inside out. They thought they were untouchable. Untouchable because they were wealthy, because they had lawyers and names on buildings and decades of inherited influence. But what they didn't realize was that influence meant nothing without access, and access had always run through me. I leaned back in the velvet chair, the burn of satisfaction rising like a second heartbeat. My phone buzzed on the table. Sean. I didn't pick up. Another buzz. Melissa. Then Thomas. One by one, the calls and texts began, like panicked waves trying to reach a shore that had already been swallowed by the tide. I smiled, not because I was cruel, but because they finally knew what it felt like to be left out, and I hadn't even started the final act. The first course had just been served. Imported Osetra caviar delicately plated on mother-of-pearl spoons, garnished with edible gold leaf. Eleanor's favourite, of course. She lifted her champagne flute, radiant in vintage Chanel, the matriarch at her moment of triumph. Around the table, crystal clinked, laughter danced politely through the air, and the Colosseum glittered in the distance like an omen no one yet recognised. And then Marco appeared, calm, composed, his dark suit impeccable, hands folded respectfully behind his back. He approached Richard first, Henry's older brother, seated to Eleanor's right, as per Italian custom, the presumed patriarch. He bent slightly, whispered something. Richard's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, what?" Marco straightened. "Forgive the interruption, signore, but there is a matter regarding payment that requires immediate attention." Henry looked up, already annoyed. "Payment? Everything was settled." "Not anymore," Marco replied, still gentle, still lethal. "The reservation was cancelled an hour ago by the event coordinator. The account linked to the original deposit has been closed." Silence. Melissa blinked. Eleanor lowered her fork as if trying to decide whether this was a joke. Sean leaned forward, suddenly pale. "I'm sure there's a mistake," he said. "You know who we are." Marco nodded. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell, I do. And that is precisely why we ask for immediate alternative payment. The kitchen cannot proceed without confirmation." The second course, sea bass with truffle foam, would not be served. Not without a credit card. Or a wire transfer? Or a family willing to admit that the rug had been pulled from under them. Eleanor turned to Sean, voice ice-thin. "Fix this." He reached for his phone, tried to speak to Marco privately, but the damage was already blooming, subtle and devastating. Other diners had begun to notice. A few turned to watch. One lifted a brow, murmuring something to her husband behind her napkin. Champagne flutes stood forgotten. Richard fumbled with his wallet, pulling out a sleek black card. Marco scanned it, then shook his head. Transaction declined. More silence, this time panicked. Sean stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "We'll resolve this. Just keep serving." "I'm afraid we cannot proceed without confirmation of funds, sir." Henry's jaw twitched. Eleanor's smile had vanished, replaced by something raw, hollow, exposed. "And me?" I watched from the shadows just beyond the terrace doors, the woman without a seat, The woman who once planned everything down to the placement of a teaspoon. The woman who had removed herself just in time to pull every string. It began with a phone call. Sean stepped away from the table, muttering into his mobile with the urgency of a man trying to seal a leak in a sinking yacht. I could see him through the terrace glass, pacing, nodding, trying to maintain control he no longer had. Then came Melissa. Her husband leaned in to whisper something and she stiffened, pulled out her phone. Her brows tightened as she scrolled. "The villa in Tuscany just emailed me," she said aloud, not bothering to lower her voice. "Our reservation has been cancelled?" A ripple passed through the table like a crack in glass. Henry pulled out his own device, thumbs flying. Across from him, Richard was already red in the face, voice rising in a tone too loud for a restaurant-like aroma. "What do you mean the jet is unavailable? We own the goddamn hours." Eleanor sat frozen, her fork still mid-air. Not a single word, not a single blink. Her world was tilting, and she was pretending the floor was still steady beneath her. More phones buzzed, one by one. Melissa's sommelier wine tour, refunded. Thomas's side trip to Napa with a prospective investor, gone. The Napa Estates assistant confirmed that the Caldwell name had been removed from their preferred guest list, citing unforeseen credit issues. Claire checked her email and paled. "The spa in Como says our deposit bounced." No, this isn't possible," Sean snapped, returning to the table with his face flushed and jaw clenched. "There must have been a mistake. My wife—" He caught himself. Too late. Eleanor looked up. "Your wife," she said slowly, her voice flat. "What did she do?" He didn't answer, because by then, he knew. I had booked it all under my company, my name, my credibility. And I had undone it with the same precision I had used to build it. They hadn't just lost dinner. They had lost Rome, Tuscany, Napa, private chefs, vintage tours, limousines, jet charters, all of it, erased, reversed, refunded. And worse, the whispers had begun. From other tables, from staff, from vendors receiving cancellation notices with familiar names but unexpected reasons. A Caldwell can't pay? A Caldwell being declined? For a family that fed on perception, the unravelling wasn't just inconvenient, it was existential. And I stood just outside the storm, untouched. I didn't need to scream, I didn't need to accuse. All I had to do was let their world collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. And that's exactly what it did. He found me in the hotel lounge an hour later, breathless and shaken, like a man who'd just crawled out of wreckage he never thought could burn. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw clenched too tight. The calm, composed man who used to glide through rooms was gone. What stood before me now was someone real, panicked, cornered, exposed. "Anna," he said, as if the sound of my name on his lips might stop the ground from crumbling beneath him. "We need to talk." I looked up from my tea, calm, composed, the opposite of him. "Now you want to talk?" He ran a hand through his hair the same way he always did when the script ran out. "What did you do?" "I cancelled my involvement," I said simply, "as you and your family had already begun doing for me. I just finished the job." He sat across from me without asking. The desperation in his movements was unmistakable. He wasn't angry, he was scared. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "The dinner, the reservations, my mother's birthday was supposed to—" "Be the scene of my silent removal?" I cut in. "Your family's big performance? A dignified exit for the inconvenient wife? Sorry if I missed my cue." His mouth opened, then closed. "You could have come to me. We could have figured this out." "I did come to you. For years." I leaned forward slightly. Every ignored comment, every room I was pushed to the side of, every time you stood beside them instead of beside me. I came to you 1,000 silent times and you never once stood up. He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked down. "You don't understand what you've done. My father, he's furious. There are investors calling. The family name—" I laughed, quiet, sharp. Ah, yes, the name, the legacy, the empire of glass. He looked at me then, really looked. Please, he said, voice lower now. Help me fix this. We can still. No, I said, my voice steady. We can't. He tried again, reaching for my hand across the table. I didn't move. His hand hovered there, suspended between memory and consequence. You said you loved me, he whispered. I did, I replied. But I won't love someone who lets me be erased. Not anymore. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was final. He left with nothing more to say, and I watched him go without a flicker of regret, because he hadn't lost control that night. He'd given it away, long before I ever took it back. He came back the next morning. No warning, no flowers, just panic thinly veiled as concern. I opened the door halfway, leaning against the frame with the kind of stillness that made men like him uneasy. You're making a mistake, he said before I could speak. I let that hang in the air, unsmiling. Funny, I was thinking the same about you, months ago. He exhaled, clearly expecting a different version of me. The more manageable one, the forgiving one, the one who smoothed chaos with a perfectly curated table and swallowed betrayal like it was wine. Anna, you've made your point. It was cruel, but fine. Let's fix it. Quietly. I'll talk to the lawyer. We'll set terms. You don't need to keep escalating. That word. Escalating. I opened the door a little wider and stepped aside. Come in. He hesitated, then walked past me, still acting like a man in charge. I followed him to the living room and sat across from him, laptop open, phone in hand. I'm not escalating, I said. I'm documenting. He blinked. What? I pulled up a folder on my screen. Caldwell Holdings, private files. Inside, financial statements, emails, copies of the trust reallocation, messages between him and Vanessa, the offshore transfers, the proposed PR rollout of our mutual separation. His face drained of colour. He leaned forward. Where did you... You left the door open, I said softly. I just walked through. He looked at me then, really looked, as if for the first time he realised I wasn't the girl he'd chosen for her discretion and presentation. I wasn't his accessory. I had become something else entirely. I've secured it all, I continued. Backups, legal copies, encrypted drives. My attorney holds the key. You can try to erase me publicly, but you will never erase the truth. You'd ruin the family over this? He said, voice hoarse. I tilted my head. No, you already did. I'm just the only one not pretending otherwise. He sank into the chair, defeated. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was surgical. Exact. I had no need to shout. The truth was louder than any scream. You don't want a war with my father, he muttered. I smiled. He's already lost one. He just doesn't know it yet. He looked away. At the walls, the floor, anywhere but me. I stood and walked to the door, holding it open. You can leave now, and when the lawyer calls, because he will, you'll accept my terms or everything I have goes public. You choose. He walked out without another word, and this time I didn't watch him go, because I had everything I needed, and all the leverage he thought he owned. He returned with papers. Not flowers, not apologies, not truth, just a manila folder, thick and crisp, the seal unbroken but heavy with meaning. He placed it on my kitchen counter like an offering or a threat, depending on the lighting. This is for both of us, he said, smoothing the cover with his palm. Clean, private. No one needs to know the details. I didn't respond. I just stared at the folder. It's generous, he added, more than fair considering everything. Considering everything. I opened it slowly. The language was sterile, precise, money, plenty of it, spread across vague timeframes and finalities, a list of assets, one-time settlement, mutual dissolution, in exchange one condition, my silence, an NDA, as if all of this could be erased with a signature and a check. I looked up. Do you know what's interesting about money? I asked, voice calm. It only works on people who need it more than they need the truth. Sean flinched, just slightly. I'm not interested in your silence package, I said, pushing the folder back toward him. Or in protecting the people who tried to make me disappear. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. He stood there, still trying to control the room, still thinking this could be salvaged by optics and legal phrasing. Think of what this could avoid, he said. The press. The questions. Your business. My business is built on reputation, I interrupted. On trust. And transparency. Everything your family has tried to smother under marble and monograms. The folder still sat between us, quiet and unopened now, like it too had run out of arguments. He leaned on the counter, jaw tight. You'll blow up everything. Do you understand that? They'll come after you. They already did, I said. You just didn't expect me to survive it. He looked at me then with something that almost resembled recognition, or fear, the same way a man might look at the ocean after underestimating the tide. You were never meant to be collateral, he said quietly. But that's exactly what I was. I reached for the folder, held it up, and dropped it into the bin beside the fridge without ceremony. It landed with a satisfying thud, sharp against the stillness. No NDA, I said, turning back to him. No silence, not anymore. He didn't argue. He just stood there for a long moment, watching me with the hollow understanding that comes when power shifts and nothing can be done to stop it. And when he left, the silence he'd once asked for remained, just not the way he wanted. Because this time, it belonged to me. The final paperwork arrived on a Thursday. Thick ivory envelopes sealed in wax, couriered with urgency that no longer mattered. I signed them at my dining table, pen in hand, sunlight warm against my back. There was no trembling, no hesitation, only clarity. I wasn't taking the estate in Tuscany, not the stocks, not the trust they tried to lock me out of before offering it back like a favour. I didn't want their money, their legacy, or the string of apologies wrapped in fine print. Let them keep their art collections and old wine and carefully laundered name. I had something better. I had my name, my company, my voice. I had walked through fire and come out not burned but purified. The lawyer had looked at me sideways when I rejected the final offer. You're entitled to more, he'd said quietly, almost confused. You know that? Yes, I replied, but I'm not interested in being owned through generosity. I left the house on Beacon Hill the same way I had lived in it, efficient, elegant, invisible to the people who thought they knew me. I took only what I'd earned, my books, my dresses, my grandmother's gold ring, the paintings I'd chosen on instinct, not value, the rest. Let it rot behind closed doors and old secrets. Freedom doesn't always arrive with a fanfare. Sometimes it's quiet, the way your shoulders drop when you realize no one is watching, the way your steps feel different when you walk without permission. I moved into a sunlit apartment with tall windows and imperfect floors. I painted the walls myself, late at night with music loud and hair tied up. No decorators, no approval needed. I filled it with flowers that didn't have to match anyone's taste but mine. And my work, it thrived. Clients who had once kept their distance now sought me out with hushed admiration. We heard what happened, they said, and we admire how you handled it. The story, though never publicly spoken, had spread the way truth often does. Quietly, undeniably, between people who recognize courage when they see it. One evening, I stood on the balcony of a villa in Portugal, coordinating a wedding for a couple who had chosen love without compromise. My phone buzzed with a message from a journalist, off the record, of course, asking if I'd ever share the full story. I smiled. I didn't need to. The people who mattered had already heard enough, and the ones who hadn't, they no longer mattered at all. 1 year later, the world looked very different. The sun dipped low over the hills of Provence, casting long, golden shadows across lavender fields and limestone terraces. I stood at the edge of the villa's balcony, clipboard in one hand, flute of champagne in the other. Behind me, music floated through French doors, mingling with laughter and the distant clink of glassware. The wedding was perfect. Everything timed to the second. Every bloom placed with precision. The bride, a Hollywood starlet with more grace than ego, had given me full control. "You see things," she'd said, eyes soft. "You see the parts no one else does." She didn't know how right she was. The staff buzzed discreetly around me, my team loyal, sharp, kind. I'd built them from the ground up. No borrowed influence, no family name greasing the wheels, just work, passion, discipline, freedom. The past had become something distant now, not erased, but quiet. I hadn't heard from any of them in months, not since the settlement, not since the press had picked up vague whispers of a scandal in Rome. The Caldwells had folded inward, retreating to their country homes and curated reputations. Vanessa had had the baby. Sean had remarried. The family name still opened doors, but now people double-checked who held the key. I held mine. As the sun slid lower, I glanced at the reception layout on my tablet, a long, sweeping table set under wisteria-draped lights. 100 guests, everyone accounted for, every seat intentionally placed. Except one. The bride had asked to leave an empty chair. For her mother, she'd said, voice cracking just slightly. It was a quiet tribute, a space that held meaning. As I reviewed the arrangement, something pulled at me. A memory. A chair that had once been missing for all the wrong reasons. I stepped outside again, watching the guests settle in. Someone raised a glass. A breeze lifted the corner of the linen. Music swelled. I lifted my own flute, holding it up to the horizon, to the sunset, to the ghosts I no longer feared. A toast. To the missing chair. To the one that taught me never to wait for a place at someone else's table. To the one that reminded me that sometimes absence is not a wound, but a doorway. I drank slowly, letting the cool sparkle settle, and then I turned back inside where my name, mine alone, was the only one that mattered. I'd really love to know. What part stayed with you? Was it the moment she said, "Seems I'm not family," the unraveling of the perfect façade, or the final toast to her own freedom? Tell me in the comments. Your thoughts genuinely mean the world to me.